Chapter 13. Signal, partial. Imperial probable. Minimal energy output. Additional energy readings indicate weapons fire, field and hull damage. The servitor finished its monologue of information and went silent. On the circular command platform of the Lord of Mankind, Inquisitor Salandra Iobel registered with report with a pursing of her lips. It was unexpected, but then nothing in the Eye of Terror was totally predictable, even on its margins. They would need to decide what to do, and quickly. That did not please her. Hasty decisions had a habit of being regretted later. They were on course for Cadia, its star shining several weeks of real space travel away. No one, not even an inquisitorial augur mission, dropped from the warp close to Cadia, at least not if they expected to survive. So the Lord of Mankind pushed through the void like a sea voyager of old, returning to port after a storm. Iobel wanted to see that fortress system again, to not be on constant alert, be free of the chronotrap, and allow herself to be tired. Above all, she looked forward to being free of her damned armor. Fire-orange lacquer covered its plates, and the outlines of angel wings, raptor heads, and rayed suns spread across its surface in lines of black iron. She shifted in her seat, unconsciously trying to release slowly cramping muscles. She had worn the battle plate for weeks, and it had begun to feel like a hand clamped over her skin. Not that there was any choice. Every member of the crew wore armor. It was a necessity. She turned to look at her two peers. Inquisitor Arrhenius sat on his brass throne, his eyes closed above the rebreather that covered the lower part of his face. He wore graphite-gray armor sculpted across the chest to resemble flayed musculature. A spread of thick cables connected his throne to the cogitator towers that ran down the center of the command chamber. Iobel could see light playing across the inside of Arrhenius's eyelids. He gave no sign of having heard the servitor's report, but she knew he had. He heard everything. On her other side, Malkira sat on her own seat of polished bone. The thrones were tiresomely symbolic, of course. Iobel's own throne was silver, but no more comfortable for it. A hunched figure crouched to the right hand of each throne, its features hidden by red robes woven with sacred names. Malkira gave a blood-wetted cough, her usual preface to speech. "We should ignore it." Iobel turned to look at Malkira, and was met by the Inquisitor's black eyes glinting back at her from the wrinkled skull of her face. "Time is running low." Malkira raised a hand and tapped the chronotrap fixed to the chest of her pearl-white armor. Cogwork whirled behind the circular pane of crystal. Iobel glanced down at the brass frame of her own chronotrap, her eyes reading the movement of the numerals etched into the silver and brass cogs. "You are correct," said Iobel. "Of course I am," snapped Malkira, and coughed again. The rhythmic pumping of the life-sustaining systems built into the crone's armor became louder. "We are risking too much if we divert our course now. A few more weeks and the data will be secure." "You don't need to convince me," said Iobel. "No," said Arrhenius. Both Iobel and Malkira turned to look at him. He had not moved, and his eyes were still closed. "We should divert course to investigate." His voice crackled out of the vox grill set into his respirator. "Ridiculous," sneered Malkira, her lips peeling back from her silver teeth. "No." Arrhenius's voice held no emotion. Iobel had heard him ordering the razing of cities with an equally dead voice. "This is an opportunity. I have accessed the scanner readouts. The ship is of unusual construction. It's definitely Imperial, in my opinion. Psi-Oculum assessment says that it has been deep within the eye. Yet it does not exhibit macro levels of malign warping. A culling of its data stores could tell us much." "Or get us all killed in the sight of safety," spat Malkira. "Safety is not why we came here." Arrhenius let that reminder sit in the silence. He was right, of course. Iobel could not deny that. They were an augur expedition, a ship sent into the Eye to gather information on its nature and current state. The data and lore they carried in their warded stacks was beyond value. It was a glimpse of the face of their enemy, one that might warn them of growing threats or reveal weaknesses. Such expeditions were dangerous in the extreme, and the possibilities of attack and violent death were the most minor of the risks they faced. The Eye itself was toxic to the soul and body. Warp energy and matter overlapped in the eye, and physical laws became thinned to the point of non-existence. At the edges of the eye, a weak skin still existed between the two realms, but at its heart, nightmare reigned unchallenged. To venture even part way into the eye risked corruption. The Lord of mankind had been crafted specially to make such a voyage. Prayers and wards had been etched into every plate and rivet of her hull. Psychic dispersers and null generators ran through her structure. Any part of the ship could be sealed and flooded with nerve gas should the systems detect an intrusion. Most of the crew were servitors, and almost all the human crew were kept in stasis until needed. All but the 3 Inquisitors would be executed on return to the Imperium. The risk of corruption was too high. All of them knew this, yet all still served. It was a fact that caused Isabel to feel puzzlement and admiration every time she looked into the face of one of the doomed but dutiful crew. But the warp not only corrupted, it also made a mockery of time. It was possible for an expedition to spend a handful of months in the eye and return to Cadia thousands of years later, or seconds after they left, or in the past. There was also no guarantee that all of those on the ship were experiencing the same amount of time. So each member of the crew wore a chronotrap, and more were set into the structure of the ship. The traps measured the subjective time and exposure to the substance of the warp, slicing it away in a million cog clicks. "There is no time," said Malkira, tapping the chronotrap set onto her breast. Isabel felt the fluttering whir of her own chronotrap send a small vibration through her armor. "Incorrect. Temporal distortion across this volume is falling, and we are within exposure levels. We approach, send a recovery mission, return and continue on to Cadia. In and out, as soldiers say." Arrhenius paused, as if enjoying his use of such a phrase. "We have risked much. Why not a little more?" Malkira snorted. After a handful of heartbeats, they both turned to look at Iobel. She knew it would come to this. "Agreed," she said. "We will investigate with caution." Malkira scowled, but began hissing orders to servitors and crew. Iobel was sure Arrhenius was smiling behind his respirator. The Titan child lay in the void, its hull gently revolving on an irregular axis. Gray clouds of gas and atomized liquid hung around its bulk, expanding slowly like warm breath expelled into cold night air. "This is ill-advised," said Astrios, and glanced towards Carmenta. She ignored him. Connected by a trunk of cables to the ship, it was easy to let the activity in the hold fall into the background of her awareness. It was not a full interface. The systems here did not allow for that. Her mind was still her own, but she could feel the rumbling dreams of the Titan child and touch its heart. It was reassuring, like knowing someone was close to you as you slept. The ship was half dormant, its injuries allowed to bleed energy and waste into the void. She felt the tug of its slumber, even as she controlled its steady beat. "The Imperial ship is on an intercept course," said Ahriman, without looking up from where he knelt on the deck. "Our alternatives at this point are limited." He was armored again. The azure lacquer reflected the stab light suspended above. A white tabard covered his torso and hung around his legs. Parchments hung from his shoulder guards, covered in script Carmenta did not understand. A design spiraled out from where he knelt. Its curves and sinuous symbols burned into the deck with a melta-torch. It spanned the width of the hold, ranging across hundreds of meters of metal plating. It had taken days, and Ahriman had labored alone until now. At the tip of his hand she saw the white heat of a flame spark and then vanish. "We may not survive the damage," said Astrios. Like Carmenta, he stood on a hoist suspended a foot off the hold's floor. "We certainly won't survive another way," said Ahriman. Astrios looked as if he were about to say something else, but remained silent. His armor was an echo of Ahriman's, but Carmenta could not shake the feeling that it looked temporary, as if the blue painted over the pitted battle plate would flake off to reveal the old bronze beneath. "They are both right," thought Carmenta. "This plan will probably kill us all, but we have no choice. Wait until the ship came close enough to become curious. Cripple its engines with a surprise weapons strike. Then Ahriman, Caden, and Astrios would board the stranded ship and take what they had come for, then run again." It was simple, but it rested so much on chance and luck that Carmenta could feel herself recoiling from the risk, not least because of Ahriman's method of boarding their prey. "He will kill us," said a voice inside her. "He has nearly done so many times over. He is our destruction." She suppressed her worries with a shiver. At least they had been lucky in one respect. They could have waited months or years for a ship to pass close enough to notice them, and decide to have a closer look. In fact, it had only taken a few weeks. The Imperial ship is closing and transmitting hailing codes. She could feel the cipher codes itching across the Titan Child systems. The signals felt aggressive, like a challenge shouted at a figure seen on the edge of light. They are right to be cautious, she thought. Why do they hail us? We are a near dead wreck in their eyes, are we not? Asked Astrios. They are seeing if there are any survivors or active response systems, she said. If they find any signs that the ship is not as dead as it seems. They won't. She had prepared for weeks, setting systems and machinery to function in broken spasmodic rhythms, and the largest part of the Titan Child's wrecked appearance was no illusion. The encounter at the dead station meant that the Titan Child was in many ways what she seemed. A half-crippled ship, twisted by battle damage, barely clinging on to existence. Every time Carmenta had linked herself to her ship, she felt its damage like a lingering fever, and had emerged with empathic wounds in her flesh and damage to her augmetics. For the first time she had begun to fear the link with her ship. She had a terrible feeling that the Titan Child had begun to hunger for her, and its hunger was not kind. Astrios grunted at her words and looked away, his eyes roaming across the design cut into the deck by Ahriman. "This will work?" he asked flatly. Ahriman looked up, his face impassive, but there was a flicker in his eyes as he looked at Astrios. "Nothing is certain," he said. Astrios met Ahriman's gaze, held it for a second, then looked down and nodded. "As reassuring as ever," said Caden. He was staring at the pattern Ahriman had cut into the floor, his eyes flicking across symbols and lines as if taking in every detail, as if he were reading. Astrios, she noticed, chose to stand at the other end of the platform from his brother. The two had not said a word to each other since they had entered the hold. They had not been able to remove the armor from Caden's remaining flesh, nor had they been able to recolor its blackened plates. Carmenta had personally fitted what augmetics were available. That at least had been successful, almost worryingly so. Caden's flesh had begun to grow and embrace the metal replacements. His right and left arms now ended in 3-digit pincers of brushed steel. Below the waist, he walked on a pair of back-jointed legs, which hissed at every step. A bolter and double-edged chainsword were mag-clamped to his back. Carmenta felt a tingle as another wash of signal from the approaching ship hit the Titan Child's sensors. Her attention strayed from these sights in front of her, as a part of the still-waking ship began to break the signal ciphers apart. There was something about the hailing signals, something hidden in the weave of their code. The cipher cracked open. She blinked, suddenly terrified. She was trapped, crammed into a shell of soft meat joined to weak metals. She could not feel the void in her outer layer. She could not feel the beat pulse of her plasma core. She began to panic. She could not move. She did not understand what had happened to her. Her flesh shell was quivering. She did not understand why. Carmenta gasped and staggered on the hoist platform. A ripple of sparks spiraled up the bundle of cables that linked her with the Titan Child. For a second, she could hear nothing but the panicked chatter of machines roaring to life in a disorganized spasm. Lights flickered on and off in the hold. The hull creaked. Somewhere in the ship, power began to flood sleeping systems. "What's happening?" Ahriman was on his feet. Carmenta blurted static-filled machine code, feeling the sharp sounds grate in her still human throat. She was swaying, her mechadendrites grabbing blindly at the air. Ahriman vaulted onto the hoist platform. One of the metal tentacles snapped at him, but he batted it away with a thought. "What?" he began. "The ship," said Carmenta. "It is afraid. It's trying to get ready to fight or run." The lights above them were strobing faster and faster, like a rising heartbeat. The ship that is coming. She felt the world sway around her. It is not just an Imperial ship. It is the Inquisition. "Multiple energy blooms," blurted a servitor wired into the sensor systems. "Full threat alert initiated." Ioville heard the words and was already clamping her helm over her head. Red light filled the command nave of the Lord of Mankind. Blast doors were dropping over the exits. A static charge filled the air as a null field activated. Iobel felt a wave of nausea as the field smothered her psychic sense. "A trap," hissed Malkira from beside her. A cyber cherub with wings of beaten copper lowered a dome-shaped helm over the crone's head. It locked in place with a hiss of air. We don't know that yet, said Arrhenius, his voice flat calm. There are other possibilities. Target energy flow fluctuating, called the servitor. Target shield sporadically active. Engines firing. A silver-coated servo-skull drifted over Iobel's shoulder. It held a bolt gun in caliper hands. Iobel reached out and took the weapon, feeling the targeting display inside her helm come alive as she touched the gold-worked casing. If it is not a trap, what other explanation could there be? She asked, glancing at Arrhenius. Target vessel firing weapons, said the servitor. Increasingly unlikely ones, said Arrhenius. His eyes opened, two bright spears of glass gazing out of the red-lit chamber. All weapons, prepare to fire. Ahriman felt the whole shake. Munitions impacts, he judged. He turned to Carmenta. She was twitching, trying to stand as sparks ran over her black robes. How far out is the enemy ship? I can't tell, she gasped. You must. How far? They have yet to reach optimal firing distance. He nodded. It was as he guessed, and it was not good. They were supposed to be closer. Much, much closer. Get control of this ship, he snarled, and turned to Astrios. Astrios, Caden, here. He was reaching into Astrios' mind even as he stepped to the deck. Ascend, he sent, as his own consciousness climbed to perfect focus. He felt Astrios' thoughts resonate with his own. He began to loop his thoughts, sending separate patterns spinning through his mind like pinwheels, each gathering power. The design etched into the floor began to glow, fire-orange light radiating from where they stood at its center. The power in his mind called to the etched symbols, and they answered him. He felt the swelling power roar with hunger that he alone could not feed. Now, he sent to Astrios and raised his hands. His mind touched Astrios' consciousness and linked to it. It was like standing at the site of a lightning strike. Around them the Titan child vanished, and Ahriman's mind soared across space like a burning comet. Accelerate, maintain fire, called Arrhenius, his voice raised over the babble of machines and voices. Burn it to nothing. Iobel watched the crew respond. Her throne and the deck beneath it were shaking in time with the recoil of hundreds of guns. Target impacts are good, purred Arrhenius. Iobel could tell he was watching the direct gunnery data flow. We will need to be closer to finish her off, but annihilation will be complete. So sure, said Malkira, the speaker grill of her helm robbing her voice of none of its scorn. Yes, said Arrhenius. We will have virtually destroyed them before they are in effective range. Iobel found herself nodding, but not because of the words. Her skin felt taut. A sour taste of metal ran over her tongue. There was something wrong. She could feel it. On her chest, the chronotrap's cogs began to whirl faster. They should have turned and left the wreck to its fate. They should have kept course for Cadia. They should... She stopped her thoughts. Her eyes were closed, her breath and pulse still. She let her perceptions settle, trying to see the pattern in the whirl of emotion and sensations. On the Lord of Mankind, she alone was a psyker. Her ability was low-grade, barely a functioning talent, but in that moment she knew that something was very, very wrong. It was like a building wave of pressure, rolling in front of a storm. Something is coming. Her voice was cold, and only she heard the tremble at its root. What? Began Arrhenius, but at that moment Iobel felt something slam into her mind with the force of a tidal wave. Around the bridge, machines, servitors, and people were yelling. Every chronotrap across the ship began to hiss as their cogs spun to a blur. Astrios could still see even with his eyes closed. He could see Ahriman stood to his right, his arms outstretched, his physical form lost in a white blaze of light. He could see Caden, his face coldly impassive. Ahriman spoke another phrase, and the world became a shape with too many dimensions that spun away like a leaf caught on the wind. The deck beneath their feet was gone, though he could still feel it. Stars surrounded them. Astrios did not need to look at Ahriman to see him. The sorcerer's mind was burning like a sun, sucking in all other light, growing brighter and brighter. The stars were turning, whirling to broken rainbows against the void. Only the three of them remained fixed. Only they were still. Everything else was movement. They were skimming beneath the void, looking out at the stars like fish seeing clouds turn above the surface of the sea. A vast shape loomed suddenly in front of them. It was a ship, jagged, stardust-pitted, a black knife cutting through the void beyond the veil of swirling stars. Fire surrounded it, streaking from its crenellated flanks. They dived towards it. He felt something shatter around them, as if they had broken through a pane of glass. They were inside the ship. He could see shapes around him. They were translucent, glass-spun outlines of walls, doors, and pipework. Then reality snapped into place with a roar of sirens and the sound of tearing metal.